right, well, let's get started. This has been quite a series. So I have been delighted to have worked with Karissa this semester. She's our faculty fellow in program development, and we've had some great programs. So we started with the book club, Think Again, and many of you know that one, and it was quite a series. And that got us started just thinking about theoretically, but also quite practically, I would say, about the whole notion of critical thinking and teaching. And then we've turned to these workshops. So taking some of those ideas, but now, fleshing them out in practice. And the last workshop, which some of you attended, had to do with more kind of short activities. And but now we think about the tough one, how to integrate something that might be scaffolded for a unit or an entire semester. So that's our topic for today. So I want to welcome Karissa Peyer from HHP, and thank you for what's been a great series so far, and definitely looking forward to what you have for us today.
Thank you, David. Thank you all for being here. I'm excited for this second workshop here. I am going to give a little bit of the same intro that some of you that were on the last workshop, the quick wits heard. So if you need to check email for the next couple minutes, I won't be offended. So why critical thinking? When I was putting together my proposal for this program, I had a lot of different topics I was considering, but I landed on critical thinking for a couple reasons. One, because it's one of those skills that we keep hearing over and over that it's what employers are looking for out of our students is these soft skills, or what I've heard more recently referred to as core skills of, working with people, but also critical thinking. And so how do we build that into our courses? I also wanted to focus on how do we build critical thinking in regardless of what program we're in. It feels like sometimes critical thinking can get siloed in maybe philosophy or political science or these courses that are not what I do in exercise science, but we still want our students to be able to think critically. So how can we integrate the concept of critical thinking within our own curriculum in broader topic areas? Critical thinking skills may seem harder to elicit in topic areas where we feel, or our students feel, like there is a truth. There is a one right answer to everything. But creative thinking shows us that there is room there for critical thinking also. So our goal for today is to share ideas of how larger projects can be structured to allow for more of this critical thinking and in-depth exploration without a crushing overload of final paper grading for the instructor at the end of the semester. So regardless of topic, we'll talk a little bit more, but I think sometimes the fear of a big critical thinking project is, what are my stacks of grading going to look like at the end of the semester that I have to get done right before final grades are due? I do want to share the caveat that this is not so much a critical thinking workshop as a workshop about ideas for how to incorporate critical thinking into your course. So let's start with some definitions. Oh, if I can get both screens to advance. There we go. So critical thinking is defined as the systemic evaluation or formulation of beliefs or statements by rational standards. They are a set of information and belief generating and processing skills. So these are skills that we want to help our students develop. Critical thinking is also a habit based on a commitment to using these skills to guide behavior. So not only do we have the skills, but even when we don't want to, even when we would like to just blindly believe our point of view, we want to be in the habit of using those skills in our daily lives. So there are some characteristics of a critical thinker. They raise vital questions and problems. They gather and assess relevant information. And they come to well-reasoned conclusions and solutions. They also think with an open mind within alternative systems of thought, recognizing and assessing as they need to their assumptions, the implications of those assumptions, and practical consequences of those. They can also communicate effectively with others in figuring out solutions to complex problems. So we want our students to be able to think about their course material and course topics in these ways. When we think about critical thinking projects, what do we want to accomplish? How can we frame what that project will be about? We want to think about the biggest question in your course or discipline that will help your students. What do you want them to be able to address when they get out into their career fields? Students can be a little hesitant about these projects, as instructors are. I have found that you often need to be a little bit looser with guidelines because you don't know where certain students are going to go with the material, and that can sometimes be frustrating to students who want a very clear list of questions that they're supposed to answer. And so it's important to frame this project appropriately to students, to almost market it to students. And we do that by framing it as an opportunity to reflect, analyze, integrate, explore, and test their boundaries of thoughts and feelings related to the class. So this is really an opportunity to show their skills. Sorry, I'm having big mouse issues. All right. So some general prompts that you might consider when designing your projects. You may ask students to be able to identify important information from among many resources provided, or to identify what information is missing. One of my other desires or reasons for wanting to focus on critical thinking comes from experience grading the critical thinking exams that our students participate in. And the general idea of some of those tasks is that they're given a lot of information and they need to find what is relevant to the questions being asked. So can they pick out that important information? You may also ask them to evaluate their assumptions as well as their remaining blind spots now that they have learned more about this topic. So, as I said, sometimes what is hard about these projects that focus on critical thinking is the grading. Critical thinking is rarely examined through a multiple choice test. And if, like me, you sometimes struggle with subjective grading, it can be helpful to have some markers that are guiding not only the students as they work on the project, but also guide you as you grade. I really love a clear rubric that I can say, this is exactly the score you've gotten on this section. And so these might be some criteria to consider. Are they asking relevant questions? Are they examining their beliefs, assumptions, and opinions fair-mindedly and weighing them against facts? Are they drawing insight and justifying their inferences and opinions? And are they thoroughly examining their assumptions and reasons, among other options? So on the instructor side, along with that uneasiness of subjective grading, sometimes just comes the basic fear of so much grading if you choose to implement a detailed critical thinking project. Hopefully some of the options we'll go through today will help you to at least spread out this grading so that you're not facing that crush at the end of the semester. Other drawbacks to these big projects are often based on their timing at the end of the semester. Turning in these projects at the end of the semester means that you miss out on the opportunity to further build on these concepts since the course is now over. From a more practical side, you may spend hours and hours providing detailed feedback that mostly gets ignored because students have already gotten their final grade and they don't see the need to read your comments now that the semester is over. All of the project designs that we will talk about today are going to spread the project out over the course of the semester to hopefully avoid these pitfalls. So let's look at some ideas. Again, remember that these are general ideas for how to format a project, not necessarily project topics, with the hope that you can then meld and mold the format to work for your course. So our first project design is what I have nicknamed portion control. As will be the theme throughout these projects, instead of one large final project, portion control breaks the project up into multiple segments that are due throughout the semester. And these segments should ideally progress in tandem with course content. As the instructor, you can decide whether you want students to complete these projects individually or in groups, and whether to include peer review or peer comparison checkpoints during the project. In Canvas, you can assign peer review so that students are randomly assigned a couple other students. You can set the number of how many, whose project segments they will review with the assignment rubric that you provide. You can also have them include comments. For peer comparison, you can put students into Canvas groups and ask them to upload their project segments to the group file share. You would then provide them with some reflection prompts to guide students through the process of evaluating the work that they submitted while comparing it to that of a few other group members. So let's look at an example of what this project might look like. So if we take a marketing project, the first segment that students might turn in would be some background on their fictional company or maybe a real company that you're having them model after, and a SWOT analysis of that company: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So they would turn that in, and then perhaps a couple weeks later, they turn in part 2, where they are talking about the strategic focus of their project, the mission statement, vision, goals, objectives for the project. Part 3, they're doing a competitive analysis of the market. Part 4, they're discussing their product placement, promotion, and pricing. Part 5, you want them to develop an evaluation plan and marketing calendar to see how their project worked, how successful it was. And then part 6, a final results executive summary. So a couple of things to consider within this project would be, how are you going to, or are you going to let students adjust their project as they move through these segments? What may often happen is they get to part 2 or 3 and they say, I really want to change some of those goals now that I've gotten to part 3. So think about whether there are ways to build in those changes, including a final segment that allows them to provide a brief summary of their entire project, gives them the space to incorporate those changes without you having to regrade previous segments. So in that executive summary, you might have them provide a brief overview of the other steps, rehash those goals, and then tell you if you met them. And maybe those goals don't have to be the same as the goals they submitted in part 2, because now that they've learned some more things, they've tried to put these into action, they've decided the goals are a little sticky and they don't love them. That final piece being a results section where they're summarizing the whole thing gives them a chance to make those changes without telling them, yes, go ahead and resubmit part 2. And I'd love to regrade everybody's part 2. So give them a built-in way to make changes. Another possible use for this type of structure would be for research projects. So breaking it up into first a literature review or perhaps a mock IRB application. Part 2, writing out their research question and hypotheses. Part 3, describing their participants and materials, then their methods, and then again, a results section where they would summarize that entire study and have an opportunity to make some changes. So that is portion control. Next is moving target. In this activity, students are essentially completing the same assignment or activity multiple times, but with new information each time. This may be new information that they are given about the same topic as a previous version, or it might be an entirely new client, new situation, or new case study. This can be used to replace existing assignments that are built on multiple drafts of the same assignment or multiple different case studies. This structure helps students to focus on why changes are made in subsequent versions. They are asked to identify what has changed in the information that they were given and what changes that led them to in their assignment or their responses and why. In an alternative and perhaps briefer version of this activity, you can have each student or group of students be given their own version of that scenario, and then have students or groups compare their responses and reflect on what led to differences in their responses. As you design this activity, consider how you will structure the grading or weight of each assignment. Will later versions be worth more points towards the final grade, or will all versions be equal? Finally, remember to include a formal reflection where students can discuss why their responses have changed between versions, and be sure to mark the importance of this component by assigning it its fair share of the final assignment grade. So let's look at an example of a moving target. Perhaps now we are teaching a criminal justice or law course. This is way outside of what I do. So if you teach criminal justice or law and you're like, this would never happen, I apologize. But maybe you're asking your students to draft an opening argument for a hypothetical criminal case. They might be the prosecutor, they might be the defense attorney. It doesn't matter. They're writing an opening argument. In each new version of this assignment, new evidence has been found in the case. And so they need to rework that opening argument to implement that new information into the draft. Encourage students to consider how this new information changes their approach to the case and to the opening statement itself, and reflect on those changes as a result of this new evidence. All right, project 3 is progression and comparison. In this way, or in this approach, it's something of a combination of portion control and moving target. So the two that we've talked about so far. So in this type of project, students are going to complete the project twice, but with 2 different scenarios. The first time through, the project should be a bit more basic, where students are perhaps working on a topic where they already have personal knowledge, or more specific to them themselves. The second time through, you would give them a more complex scenario that will require several adaptations from that first version. Consider breaking the project the first time through into small segments, similar to portion control, that are submitted throughout the semester, perhaps every 2 to 3 weeks. After each of these segments is submitted, use Canvas rubrics and comments to give students feedback about where they were successful, as well as where they may need to make some changes, such as providing more detail, or perhaps you need to clarify some course concepts. In project 2, the second time through the project, they have the same general directions, but again, with a more complex scenario. And you can choose how you're going to structure this. Are you going to have students turn in project 2 as a final project, or will they submit them in sequence with project 1, turning in the first part of project 1, followed maybe a week or 2 later by the first part of project 2 before you move on to the next segment of the project? Be sure to, again, include guided reflection assignments where students can discuss the differences between project 1 and project 2 and why they had to change their approach based on those differences. So this time we're going to share an example that we actually use in one of the classes that I teach here in HHP. So it's an exercise prescription. Students are tasked with creating an exercise program for themselves first. They summarize their current exercise habits and any pertinent medical concerns, their goals, and practical considerations for the program. So that's part 1 of their self project. They then write individual sections about cardiovascular training, part 2, muscular training, part 3, and flexibility and body composition, part 4. In project 2, the second version of this, they then repeat the process, but this time the client is someone else. Right now, I let my students choose a friend or a family member. Generally, we tend to get a lot of grandparents for part 2 of this project, but you may also provide a case study client to your students for this, or maybe a few different clients throughout the class. And then after creating both programs, you would want students to reflect on the changes that they had to make from their self project to grandma or grandpa and why those changes were appropriate for this new client. Our last project setup is what I'm calling level selection. So here students are presented with a project in, again, a number of small sections. And you can then set this up in a couple of different ways. So the first option would involve taking an existing large project and, again, breaking it up into several small segments. Or you can offer multiple small projects that don't necessarily fit together into a larger project. Either way, students are then allowed to select which sections of work they will complete based on the grade that they wish to aim for. More project sections or more challenging projects must be completed to be eligible for an A than are necessary to be eligible for a B or a C. This approach encourages students to make an intentional commitment to the effort that they will put forth in these activities. If students commit to reaching for an A, they are acknowledging that this will take more work and more time than what would be needed for a B or a C level project. At the same time, it acknowledges that some students are perfectly happy with a B or a C in some courses. In that case, rather than students turning in and instructors having to grade lots of substandard work, students are encouraged to instead dedicate more effort to a smaller number of activities. It should be made clear that students still must submit high-level work, whichever activities they select to earn their targeted grade. It is not automatic or guaranteed just because they selected that level. There are a few logistical details to consider when adopting this approach for your projects. The first is to think about when or if students will be allowed to change their target grade. If a student later decides that they want to shoot for an A instead of a B, will they have this option? It's also worth thinking about what you will need to do in your Canvas gradebook for this scheme to work without causing you mathematical headaches. So how are you going to set up either weights or points so that you can make this somewhat automatically happen, depending on which pieces they complete? Going along with that consideration is how are you going to schedule those various components? Can you stagger them throughout the semester still to spread out the instructor workload of grading? Finally, just one more time, remember to emphasize that selecting a certain level does not guarantee that as their final grade. They must still submit good quality work to earn that grade. It's just what they're shooting for. So here's an example from an abnormal psychology course. C level would be your kind of basic offering. Students will complete a case study of an individual with the mental illness of their choosing. They're then going to discuss relevant background information, clues about symptoms and suggested treatment, and create a professional brochure about this illness for that case study that could be used in a doctor's office or some other setting. If they want to shoot for a B, they would complete all of that, but then they would also add an interview with somebody who works in the field, a doctor, a behavioral specialist, a therapist, etc. They have to submit interview questions and a video of that interview edited down to the most important content. Finally, if they want to shoot for an A, they would do both of those pieces, the C and the B options, and then they would also include a movie analysis, analyzing a movie that includes mental illness, discussing the symptoms seen in the character, how they do or do not meet diagnostic criteria, and related challenges or issues that are presented in the plot of the movie. So any of these can be, again, these are more how to structure projects rather than project topics. But hopefully there's something here that seems like it could be applied to something in a course that you teach. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move to breakout rooms and let you talk a little bit about how your favorite option from this list could maybe work in one of your classes.
Okay, so we're ready to go. Let's take some time to discuss some very thoughtful patterns, and let's see what you do with them.
Welcome back, everyone. Dave and I were just talking. We're excited that everybody stayed in the breakout room that whole last 60 seconds. We're hoping that means there was good conversation and exciting things happening. Does anybody want to volunteer to share their idea of how they might adapt one of these projects for their class?
I already have a project in one of my courses, in a pollinator biology course. And one of the things that I talked about is needing to shift its focus to critical thinking and to do your portion control prescription to keep my sanity in grading, and to have them provide them an opportunity to better incorporate feedback. And so that's why I landed in the portion control group, but we refuse to only talk about that because I also think their research projects are group projects, and I think I need to add to it a component of that level selection too.
Okay. So that they have a say in what they're shooting for. Are you feeling like you've got some